You're listening to Retail Disrupted, a podcast that explores the latest industry developments and the trends that will shape how we shop in the future. I'm your host, Natalie Berg. Hello and welcome back to Retail Disrupted. On today's episode, we're going to be exploring the major news coming from Amazon. Earlier this week, Amazon announced that they're going to be closing down their 19 Amazon Fresh stores here in the UK. These stores only launched 4 years ago, and they were designed to revolutionize the way that we shop for groceries. So the fact that they are closing down is major news. It brings up a whole host of questions around where Amazon goes next, whether or not we should be looking at this as a failure or just part of the innovation process. And what does it mean for the future of checkout-free stores more generally for the industry? Because Amazon wasn't the only retailer to move into this space. They were the first, but they weren't the only one. Now, just very briefly, if you're unfamiliar with the concept, Amazon Fresh stores are still AI-powered checkout-free stores. So the way it works is shoppers use an app to enter the store. Amazon then uses computer vision-powered surveillance technology to track the items as you pick them up off the shelf and put them in your basket. Then shoppers are automatically billed as they leave. So very futuristic, very tech-infused, fully autonomous, and in theory, frictionless. Now, some might argue that there was certainly some friction on entering these stores and a few other, especially in the beginning, certainly some teething problems. But the aim was to make it a frictionless, seamless experience for the customer. However, as I've said many times, there is a very fine line between seamless and soulless. Now, I don't mean to say that these stores were terribly soulless. I think Amazon over the years got better at humanizing them, let's say. But I do think that was one of the challenges here. Now, it's just me on the podcast today, so I'm going to try to keep this short, snappy, and focused. I have split the episode into 3 parts. Firstly, we're going to look at what went wrong, why Amazon made this very difficult decision to shut these stores. We're then going to explore whether Amazon actually wanted to run supermarkets, or was this always just one big tech experiment? And lastly, we're going to look at what this means for Amazon's grocery business going forward. So lots to unpack, and I'm conscious that I'm recording this at 5 o'clock on a Friday. So I am going to do my best to whiz through this as quickly as possible. I should also let you know that my voice is about to go. I've been talking about this news, and I just finished another podcast recording with TikTok. That'll be a really interesting one to share with you all. It's coming out in a couple of weeks, so definitely check back for that. But recording back-to-back episodes and posting videos on TikTok and YouTube about this Amazon news means that my voice is, it's on its way out. So, so hopefully we can get through this episode and the weekend can start. But I should also do something that I'm not very good at doing just because I forget half the time. But I should also just let you know about some of my Retail Disrupted social channels, especially TikTok and YouTube. I'm finally joining the 21st century, and I'm going to be posting more videos on those channels. So it'll be a mix of analyst commentary, so kind of my reaction to news stories, and also I'm going to be sharing clips from the podcast. So please do check those out, and if you'd like to follow me, I would love that. I am also going to share my link to the Retail Disrupted LinkedIn page, where you'll find even more exclusive insights from the podcast. Okay, so let's start with the first question, which is what went wrong at Amazon Fresh? Now, I think there's 2 things here. Firstly, I think they underestimated the competition. The UK is one of the most competitive grocery markets in the world, and especially grocery e-commerce. That's even more competitive. Because of this competition, there is a lot of innovation. Like, the bar is really high. So if Amazon was going to come in and disrupt the status quo and do something that nobody else was doing, it had to be pretty special. It had to be really radical, really groundbreaking. And to be fair to Amazon, they did do this. Amazon, as I said, is a tech company first, retailer second. So, as an outsider, they're very good at spotting where they can improve the customer experience, where those points of friction exist, where there's an opportunity to just do things better. And they rightfully identified the checkout as an area that's ripe for disruption. This is an area that had been ignored by the supermarkets for a very long time. We just sort of accepted waiting in line. And as a shopper, there's nothing worse than going around a grocery store, finding all the things that you need, having a fantastic experience, only to get to the checkout and find a long line. Nobody wants that. So Amazon thought, you know what? We can just rip up the rule book here and totally redefine this experience. And so I think they were onto something. The launch of these fully autonomous checkout free stores was impactful. It was wildly innovative. It was futuristic, and it made us all wonder if this could change grocery shopping forever. This could have been the differentiator, the killer differentiator that Amazon needed in what is a very crowded market. But a couple of problems. Yes, they were able to achieve that all important first mover status, first mover advantage. But as we know, today's innovations very quickly become tomorrow's norm. And that's what happened. The rest of the industry thought, okay, this is probably something we should be doing. And before you knew it, everybody was trialing their own version of Just Walk Out. In fact, some of the supermarkets were using Amazon's technology. So Sainsbury's is a good example of that. And I think we have to give Amazon some praise here because, as Maya and I mentioned throughout the book, Amazon is a catalyst for change. It's because of Amazon that we as customers ultimately have a better experience. Now, I know that's a very nuanced statement, and we're not going to get into the semantics here, but they do force legacy retailers to raise the bar. And that means that as customers, we all have a better experience. So yeah, it didn't take long for Tesco, Sainsbury's, even Aldi. Even Aldi launched their own version of Just Walk Out. Now, interestingly, with Aldi, you have to pay a £10 deposit, and they've had their own issues with that. So the question now is, where does this leave Amazon? If the technology that was meant to be the differentiator was now being trialed by your rivals, well, what is it that makes you special as a brand? What makes shoppers choose you over everyone else? And I think that brings us to the second point, which is really the crux here. It's never been clear to me what Amazon stands for in grocery. In non-food, sure, we get it. Amazon is convenience, it's ease, it's, reducing that cognitive load. But in grocery, what is the value proposition? Are they cheaper than Sainsbury's? Is the quality better than Tesco? Is it more convenient than the Co-op? I honestly have no idea, and I'd be willing to bet that most shoppers don't either. And I think that was a fundamental problem for them. The other problem is that customer adoption of the technology has been slower than expected. And there's lots to talk about here. And for the sake of, this episode and me not rambling for too long, I'll keep it short and sweet. I think what shoppers want at the checkout is choice. I'm hearing that time and time again from retailers. Yes, they want self-service, but not always. They don't want tech being forced on them. They want to have the option. They want the choice. So it's really not surprising that those fully autonomous trials at the other British supermarkets, Tesco, Sainsbury's, they've been phased out in favor of a more hybrid approach. So in summary, I would say that, look, Amazon was successful in disrupting the industry, as they so often are. They were successful in forcing incumbent retailers to raise their game, as they so often are. But I think we have to be reminded of a really important lesson here, which is that you have to have a very clear understanding of your identity, your purpose, what makes you special, what's your reason for being, for reason for existing. And how do you differentiate from your competitors, especially in a cutthroat market like UK grocery? So now I want to explore whether Amazon actually ever intended to become a supermarket operator or whether this was just an experiment and just a showroom for their tech. So we know that Amazon likes to experiment, right? Amazon loves to try things out, to throw ideas against the wall, see what sticks, and they have the luxury of long-term thinking. They play the long game. When they first launched online grocery shopping in Seattle, they tested it for years before rolling it out to other cities. And the same goes for bricks and mortar retail, which is still a relatively new space for Amazon. We had Amazon Books, Amazon 4-Star, Amazon Pop-Up, Amazon Style. Now, none of these formats still exist. I think it's fair to say they've all been experiments rather than long-term ambitions to take over physical retail. But what I would say is that grocery feels different. I think they had genuine ambitions with grocery. At one point, there was talk of Amazon opening hundreds of these stores across the UK. I think they understood that even though the online grocery sector here is very well developed, it's one of the most advanced grocery commerce sectors in the world. Even so, you still need stores. Now, Ocado is probably the exception here, but you still need stores. When it comes to food retail, nearly 90% of sales still take place in stores. And now that's even after 30 years of grocery commerce, plus a pandemic that we all thought would kind of propel us to this more digital world. So the fact is, stores will always play an important role. So you have to ask yourself, what was Amazon's original goal here? Why would they come into such a competitive market, such a difficult market that is it's a low margin business? It's very well served by existing retailers. What were they trying to achieve? Now, I don't think Amazon ever set out to dethrone Tesco and become Britain's biggest supermarket. I think the aim was to get enough Prime members buying their groceries through them. Now, I've said this many times on the podcast, but buying groceries is unique because it's habitual. It's something that we do every week, every few days. If you are buying your groceries through Amazon, you are going to be more loyal. You're going to renew your Prime membership, and you are going to make Amazon your first port of call for everything else. We also have to remember that Amazon is a tech company. Selling their own technology, in this case, the Just Walk Out tech, selling that to other retailers, that is way more lucrative than selling fruit and veg. Now, that might be a harder sell now that Amazon has decided to close its own stores. George Knott at The Grocer pointed that out. I think it's a really good point. But I do think this tech works really well on those occasions when shoppers are pressed for time and they just want to get in and out of stores as quickly as possible. I would go as far to say that it's actually been a game changer in that respect. And I think we're going to continue to see this technology popping up in airports, train stations, hospitals, football stadiums. So bringing this back to Amazon Fresh and kind of what was the point of it? I think in some ways, yes, absolutely. These stores were a showroom. They were a laboratory for Amazon's technology. So where does Amazon go from here? Now, it's worth calling out that they are going to be converting 5 of those stores to Whole Foods Market. I think that's a good move, especially in London, where Whole Foods has always traditionally done pretty well. But the real story here is that Amazon is going to be doubling down on grocery e-commerce. I've always said that Amazon needs to decide if they want to be the retailer or the marketplace when it comes to grocery. Clearly, in non-food, they are they are sort of both, but they are the marketplace. That is the Amazon model. It looks like when it comes to food, they finally made a decision and they're going to be the marketplace. They're going to focus on Whole Foods and other partners like Morrisons, Co-op, Iceland, and GoPuff, the quick commerce brand. My question is there room for another online-only supermarket in the UK? I think it's a pretty important question. Ocado does a fantastic job here. I'm not sure there's room for a second. And again, talking about muddled propositions, I'm not too sure about, especially in the absence of stores, having Whole Foods, Morrisons, Co-op, and Iceland. These are brands that stand for different things. And yes, you can argue that you're giving your customers choice which is incredibly important for a marketplace when it comes to non-food. But when it comes to grocery, it's a very different experience online. And mostly what shoppers want is they want the convenience. They want you to reduce that cognitive load and make it easy, take the thinking out of it, take the chore out of it. And they don't want substitutes. They want to know that the stuff they're ordering is going to turn up. That's really what it's about. It's about making it easy. And I do wonder where Amazon goes from here. I think the other important point here is that this quick commerce trend isn't going anywhere. And in fact, I was at a breakfast briefing earlier this week with several very senior grocery leaders, and they all agreed that quick commerce is here to stay. Not 10, 15 minutes, that we didn't need that. There's no need for it. The economics don't work. But 20 to 30 minutes, shopping for tonight, that's those same day slots, that's here. And who's really well placed to serve that need? The traditional supermarkets, because they've got the store estate. They can serve the customer from their stores. So that makes things a little bit more challenging for Amazon as well. By early next year, Amazon will double the number of Prime members who have access to at least 3 grocery options through their partners. Next year, Amazon will also introduce perishable groceries like fresh produce, dairy, meat, and seafood, alongside all their non-food products on amazon.co.uk. Now, this is interesting because when I was in Seattle earlier this year at Amazon's analyst event, there was some real excitement about this, about consolidating grocery and non-food orders, especially when it comes to same-day delivery. So I think this is something that is definitely worth watching. It could be the thing that differentiates Amazon. Whether or not it's enough of a differentiator is another question. But there was a lot of emphasis on this, as well as the broader, what they call everyday essentials category. So basically the non-perishable stuff. And in fact, earlier this year, when I interviewed Amazon's head of Germany, Rocco Broniger, that's an episode you can check out, and I'll link to it in the show notes. But he really stressed the opportunity here as well. So it's not just a UK and US thing. This is definitely the way that Amazon is moving globally. So in summary, shutting down Amazon Fresh may be a setback. But with Amazon, we know that failure often leads to something else, something bigger, something better. I don't know how many of you remember Amazon's smartphone. Probably not too many because it wasn't around for very long. In fact, it was probably Amazon's biggest flop. But those learnings were really valuable and eventually led to something that many of us do use today, which is Alexa. So when it comes to groceries, I don't think Amazon is ready to throw in the towel just yet. I think they have their work cut out for them. And I think they will have learned a lot from running bricks and mortar stores. And it's also pretty refreshing to see that they're going to be focusing their energy on e-commerce, which, let's face it, that's Amazon's bread and butter. That's what they do really well. So I'm excited to see what comes next. There's certainly going to be a lot more innovation, and I am not going to be writing Amazon off in grocery just yet. Thank you for listening to Retail Disrupted. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating or review or share it with others. It really makes a difference.